Yeah, it's John Robb interviewing Vivien Goldman, the punk professor. Are you still a punk professor, or is that?
Oh, I'm still punk professoring. Very soon I'm going back to do David Bowie again, which is one of the sort of four courses I seem to teach on rotation, along with punk, Fela Kuti, and the Bob Marley course.
Yeah,
So
so three quite diverse figures there, isn't it?
all except all of them except for Bowie, I had a kind of really close relationship with. So it's very nice to revisit every on this sort of 4 year cycle. And then, in addition to that, teaching David Bowie is obviously incredible because it leads you into so many areas. And of course, I am who I am. I'm a Londoner. I remember I'll never forget, hearing Bowie on the little transistor radio in my parents' bathroom on Finchley Road. And it was just so, ground control to Major Tom. It was so transformative. I still remember that moment. So because of that moment, I really always feel thrilled to teach the Bowie course. It just
Would
touched
you
me.
would you say Bowie's your central kind of pop figure?
Oh, that's a hard question.
Well, it doesn't have to be. No.
He's already coming with the hard questions, people. I don't know, but I do love David Bowie, you know, and I love Mark Bolan, who I also get to teach, obviously along with Bowie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by Bolan because he was kind of written out the story in the end, but he actually was the innovator, the accidental innovator, wasn't he?
Why do you say accidental?
Because I think Bowie's genius was that he had a plan, and Mark's genius was he just wrote songs and instinctively started everything. Glam, the soul thing. He was ahead of Bowie on that. But I don't think he realised it was never conceptual with Mark.
That's
It was
an
natural.
interesting debate, about what is the word instinctive, or was it very deep-seated, artistic choice, actually?
So for you in your journey at Finchley Road, I mean, growing up, when was the first time pop itself impinged in your consciousness in the 1960s, I guess? So
Yeah,
yeah.
really, my big sister Judy, and she turned me on to things I still listen to today, like Astrid Gilberto and certain jazz. And like now, Astrid Gilberto is still very much a leading light for me, aesthetically and creatively.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's quite an esoteric sort of starting point, which makes sense actually.
Oh, I never thought of that. I thought just everybody loved Astrid Gilberto and French pop. Tous les garçons et les filles de mon âge, all that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great, but usually when people are 12 or 13, it's Beatles and the Stones or something.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I did have the Beatles Stones like everybody, but it's funny because when you asked me that, I guess my mind went to the family formative influences and I flashed right back to that living room.
So what was the first music that was actually yours? The one that you discovered yourself?
It's a good question. Uh Ask me some. Okay, it's funny. I can't think of things like in that way. Let me try and think about it. The first single I bought, I remember that, was in that landmark shop now long gone. Anybody from Northwest London will remember Manzi's record store shop on in Swiss Cottage. It was really a big hangout. And there, I think probably the first thing I bought was a piece of marketing. Oh gosh, you make me remember this stuff that Columbia put out. The Rock Machine Turns You On. Do you remember that? It was when they were
No.
discovering compilations
Yeah.
and had Buffalo Springfield, I think, people like that. So that was interesting. But the first single I bought, and definitely one of the first things I ever really noticed for me was Roxy Music, Virginia Plain.
Do you,
Yeah,
you're
that
more,
was the first thing I went
yeah.
out and bought, as a single, but it was a
So you
good hangout.
would
Manzi's
you
record.
say you're more of a 70s kid than a 60s kid then?
Oh, Gosh, you're clever. I suppose that makes me more of a 70s kid. I think, I come from quite a semi-orthodox background, Jewish, and what's interesting.
Background.
Now, let me share an interesting thing. Obviously, it's a bit of a, sensitive topic at the moment, being Jewish, just being Jewish itself is sensitive, everybody's looking at you for all sorts of things. But one thing I'd like to share about Jewish people that people don't realize, if they're at all Orthodox, is you sing all the time. Did you know that?
No, but it's a very musical culture. I mean, I really love the Yiddish folk songs, and they're all very minor key and they're very sad.
Yeah, there's all of that.
Even the ones you dance to are sad. Yeah.
Yes, and that blue note, and but you sing all the time. In adult life, maybe even as recently as writing Revenge of the She-Punks, I suddenly found out that not everybody sings all the time.
No, not so.
When you were growing up, okay, here I am in interview mode. When you were growing up, did you used to sing around, if you had Sunday lunch together, if you indeed did have Sunday lunch, would you then sing as a family and do harmonies?
Not as an English person, no. Which is what always fascinates me about English pop culture. It's not the sort of thing people do naturally walking down the street, but you put a bunch of people in a space to make music, and we're really good at it. I don't understand why. Maybe you do as a punk professor.
You think other people wouldn't be as good at it in other places?
Well, like you say, in other cultures, if you go to Cuba, it's very musical culture. And if you go to other countries, but England, it's ostensibly, you can hear music everywhere, but people don't walk down the street singing. But give them a microphone and they'll deliver it.
That's very interesting. So you're saying we're going to leave this point entirely, okay? Don't worry, but I'm still processing it. So you're saying you really didn't sing a lot at home, okay? And that most people ordinarily don't really. Okay, well, that's the end of my point. We sang a lot at home. My father was a musician. He was into gypsy jazz, right? And we did used to gather around the piano, not all the time, but sometimes of a Sunday evening.
Could you play piano as well? Did he teach you?
Well, am I paying you 300 an hour as my shrink?
I'm just interested.
Maybe I should be, because, okay, well, I did in the end get piano lessons, but by the time I got piano lessons, I was quite bolshy already, and I was always telling my teacher what to do, and I always had a lot of songs in my head, you see, all the time. I remember being at school, having a lot of songs in my head. I still remember some of the really early songs that I wrote in science lab. So I was always telling the teacher, getting him to play my songs. It wasn't really a good way to be a student. As a professor, I now realize. So I gave him a pretty hard time, wherever he is. I'm sorry. So I'm not quite sure how we got into my childhood, but that's it. That's my childhood and the formative influences of my youth. And then you made me remember, gosh, we sang a lot at home. Yes, we did.
It's important. It's important. I think it's a very important part of the story. So in the 70s, I mean, rock and music. What else was it? Was you kind of a glam kid, or were you kind of going more sort of quite into lots of different types of music? Were you a top of the pops kid when you were about 15?
I think I was more into theatre. I used to go and help out at the Hampstead Theatre Club. I don't know. I think I got into music more when I was a bit older. I wasn't really in any of those things. I was always in the library. I'm a nerd, and that's why, I love nerds. And, the Flying Lizards, which was a stage in my musical progress. What was great about the Flying Lizards, and they won't mind my saying this, we were all nerds. We were all nerds together. The whole thing was a sort of experiment that accidentally had some success. And tell me one other band. I challenge you. Give me your Oasis and your whatever, but which other band all the members went on to be professors?
It's probably very... No, not every single member. There's a couple. I can think of a couple of members, but not every member.
Every single member of our incarnation did.
Flying Lizards sound like a band where everybody's a professor. in the best
Yes,
possible way. it's it was so perceptual.
it was fun. We did a lot of things then that were fun. Oh, we're meant to be talking about my musical progress, right? That was
Yeah,
part
but
of what
that was a nice little tangent. But I
I'm
mean,
so excited to speak to you. I can just whittle on for ages about anything. But today we're speaking about music and our musical progress.
yeah. So I'm kind of interested how you go from somebody who's listened to music a bit to ending up being on the music press and in that original kind of London scene, the punk scene as well. And it's to me, from an outsider, it seems like there's a sudden jump there, but there's got to be a bit in between, haven't there? When you go, how do you cross the threshold to become an insider?
Oh, I remember very clearly when I started working in music, I was with somewhere backstage at a festival with a friend, and I didn't want to go into somebody's dressing room. They were saying, come in, come in. Oh, no, no, no. And I didn't think I belonged. I didn't think I belonged. So I always, I guess, felt like an outsider. I was primarily, I suppose, a nerd and a writer. But I always sang, you see. But to me, it was something we did in the family. And it wasn't something I really thought of doing. I just was more normal to be a writer. We had quite a few writers in my family. We did actually, not, and I knew about them. And also I knew about other women writers. There's, for example, Jane Austen. She's a woman writer, right? Doris Lessing. I was very into her. So yeah, I was a writer, and I'm a writer. But it never in a million years crossed my mind to do anything with the singing that I did nonstop and did at home all the time en famille. It was something we did as a family. Never thought of doing it on the stage or for other people. Only other people got me to do it. The first person to take me in the studio was one of the Wailers, Tyrone Downey,
Mhm.
because he just heard me singing. Unfortunately, that album never came out, and poor Tyrone is no longer with us. But as you ask, not that you did,
Mm.
because you got me
Mm.
ranting on now.
I mean, did you did PR, of course, famously for Bob Marley? Yeah.
I did PR famously for Bob Marley, so it's showing I did a good job on the PR for me being a PR for Bob, right? Um,
How did you end up with that job? How does that?
well, actually, funny enough, it's the same girl, Nikki Hepworth, who dragged me into somebody's dressing room when I said, "Oh, I don't belong." She's like, "Don't be ridiculous. Of course you do." Nikki Hepworth, where is she now? You know, she wasn't really a nerd. She was much more glamorous. She's a lovely girl.
Mhm.
And, I think she was working on Rolling Stone when they started. I was already working at my first job out of a free magazine at the Tube, Tottenham Court Road Tube giveaway. That was Honor magazine, extremely of its moment. The name of that magazine was Cassettes and Cartridges.
Wow, that's even I've never heard of that one.
And it was the trendy offshoot of the venerable magazine, The Gramophone.
Okay, so is it like the pop version?
Yes. Now,
Mhm.
the Gramophone was like the magazine they had since they started inventing gramophones. So it was like extremely venerable. So I was like the cool offshoot of the Gramophone. We had an office in Soho. It was over the Purple Pussycat strip club.
Mhm.
So, I did go and look in there sometimes. The girls always seem to look very bored. But anyway,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
starting the music business. And then I got poached to Transatlantic Records, where I did PR. And I worked with some amazing people, like Flora Purim. So I did people like that. And some folkies like Richard Digance. So yeah, and then I got poached from there to Ireland, and I got special responsibility for the Wailers, for all the reggae. Yeah, I did. And
Wow.
we
I mean,
from
that's a hell of a job, isn't it? I mean,
was, and I reported directly to the man himself, Chris Blackwell. Yeah.
yeah.
Heading up.
So what was that like then? I mean, you've written over the years a lot about women in music, and I think it would be fair
Yes.
to say that the 70s was not quite as liberal and those attitudes as maybe that, or maybe it was. I don't know.
On these magazines. I mean, with my dear sister, friend Jeanette Beckman, who was the leading photographer at that time, we often talk about it a lot because she didn't go through it the way I did, because she was more with the artists and not as much with the office politics. But ask anybody, on sounds, it was rough. And I remember, not everybody, there was cool people like, who I'm still friends with, like John Lydon, but it was just the whole rockocracy, the cockocracy of the rock establishment. And, they really, really didn't want girls around because it completely threatened their worldview. And even when I had been made features editor, they still were doing this thing, why should we write for women? Women don't buy music. Women don't listen to music. I'd say, well, what am I? Chopped liver? Come on. You're actually a boss, in fact, and I'm female as it goes. So there was a lot of that. But, I think maybe I was a bit of a tough indie spirit. And anyway, I'm still in that game, along with other games,
I mean, that's the first time I saw your name was in Sounds before punk. Actually, I used to get it, buy all the newspapers as a kid, and that's where I remember your name from. Writing about stuff I'd never heard of, actually. So, yeah, which is how it should be. That's what a writer should always be one step ahead of the reader. Yeah,
I found enough have sort of standing argument with a lot of people. I was with a big German music critic on a big German radio show, and he was saying to me, of course, all the good music is gone. We had the best of it. I was like, no. And I said this on the air. I was so shocked. I got a round of applause when I went back to the office, actually, because they all agreed with me. I said, if you're feeling like that, you're not doing your job. Because you're meant to be here, to open new musics and so on to people, and hopefully new ideas and so on. And it's inevitable that new ideas and new music, it will be happening simply because we're all human, and this creativity stuff doesn't stop. It's just like the river keeps on rolling. So even if you're not aware of it, or even if you're not aware of it and you don't like it, the fact of the matter is there will always be something happening just by the law of averages. So if you're promoting yourself as a sort of cultural critic type, it is supposed to be part of your brief to go out there and seek it out. And you get the gig by having the awareness and the ears and the insight to sift for people, hopefully, the better from the less better, and present it in palatable form and do your little bit to keep the culture moving. That's what I said to him on the air, though less eloquently and shorter. I do believe that, and having, don't you? Well, you're very good at that.
100%. I don't think anybody says that. I think, do they honestly think the only time culture in 100,000 years of human culture is only good when you were 16? It's a really bizarre way of looking at the world, isn't it?
However, many people do. And having said that, I think shrinks have studied this, and I do think that it's true, that one has a special engagement with the music of what's normally happening in one's youth, the music that first turned you on. I'm sure, if I'm if I'm in the latter stages of existence, as it were, I'm sure I'd want to be listening to Lovers Rock. Hit me with some D Brown,
Yeah, it's more intense, of course, but it doesn't mean it stops just because you got older. That's the thing.
Yeah, you have a special relationship.
So what would you like? What
my book? Yeah, hang on. It's all in here, people, because I know we're going to run out of time. I don't know whether around because everybody wants to talk to John Robb. But here is my book. It's lovely. As you can see, it's very big. Look how big it is.
Yeah, books have to be big. I mean, how do you fit all of Rebel music into one book? I mean, it's that's true. The book is it's not what you put in; it's what you miss out.
So what
was it like? So, what was it like working with like Bob Marley then, and the people and the Jamaican musicians?
Well, you can read all about it. You can read all about it in there. But the thing is, it was a gas, it was really lovely. I have to say, I keep on coming up with this, but it's true. Working with Bob Marley and the Wailers at that moment, so young, right, as I then was, it just simply set a very high bar for your life. So the rest of your life, you go on trotting along, trying to sort of recreate in some way that feeling of intensity, that feeling of commitment, because why this, you know, people feel so impotent nowadays. It is one of our big problems, isn't it?
Mm.
And when you feel within yourself that whatever's going on outside, you have a sense of mission. You're good at that. You are doing, what your little bit is that you can do to help keep the light shining on in the world. And you're doing it. It might not be to huge acclaims and series and headlines, but you're doing the work. You're building the community, using culture as our weapon. That's kind of what we do. So I have a lot of people in here talking about this.
Yeah,
So
I mean
I'm
that's good. Look,
about to run out of time.
I think it's important. It's important that people see the book, and that actually brings us on to the next stage. Really, I mean, I think in some ways it could be argued that you're a pioneer of the punky reggae party in a sense. You're joining the dots before punk, and it comes into punk. You must. I mean, I see pictures of you sitting in John Lydon's flat in Gunter Grove. You must have been the reggae expert who had all the records and the contacts.
They've just used this Dennis Morris photo. He'd forgotten or something that it was me because he doesn't mention me by name, but it was a cute photo. And it was me, Dennis Brown, also late Castro Brown, who was the head of the label, and his bestie, and John, all hanging out at Gunter Grove. Because I used to really bring a lot of reggae artists around there, because we were all into it. And John's place in Gunter Grove at that time was a big hangout, because none of us lived in such a big place.
Mm.
And he had the big speakers. Say no more. So it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
party central for a while. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I can definitely say I was an engine in the punky reggae part. There's no doubt, because I had those many conversations with Bob Marley, and I'll never forget that day when I had the Clash's white label and they had Police and Thieves on it. And I went round, I was living where they, very near where they were mixing and recording Exodus, the Exodus album, about which I wrote a book. And I went round there to play it to Bob, and Lee Perry was there, who produced the original track with Junior Mervyn, the original Police and Thieves. So it was like, wow, double whammy. I got lucky this afternoon, so they both there. It's like, I always remember the excitement, because I knew it was like a cultural moment, because you could see the boomerang effect. You could just see it happening. And we were in that studio on Lancaster Road where Joe Strummer lived, and so did Aswad live. So we were like right there on the ley line of the punky reggae party, you could say. And so anyway, as you can imagine, as you would have been doing had you been there, I was like watching them really closely, making my little mental notes in my mental note. So they started doing, Joe Strummer doesn't really sing like Junior Mervyn. He's got more of a gruff, he's not a conventional he's not a good singer, conventionally speaking, is he? That's not his thing.
communicator.
So, yeah. He's somebody who knows how to use his voice to great effect.
Mm.
He's not Jacques Brel or, you know what I mean. Anyway, cut to the chase. So when it starts, they look at each other slightly like askance, like what's happening. And then as soon as it sort of hits and they're like half a line in, they get it. They completely get it. And they were saying things like, yeah, we like the way that he feels it. And then at the end, Bob said one of those things that made him Bob, like, how does he get to be Bob Marley? He said, I'm not doing the accent. I don't like to see people seeming to damage themselves. They're putting safety pins through their ears or whatever. He thought he didn't really like it, but he said, I like to see a man who can suffer pain without crying.
Mm. That's a very profound line, actually. Yeah.
I've kept it in my mind ever since. And at times when I feel a bit wobbly, I try and think of that. To cry a little bit and let it out, but I don't think crying always helps.
Yeah, I think I can always hear that in Strummer's voice as well. There is something deeper than just the lyrics he's singing as well, isn't there? I think there's a lot of pain in there. So that's a very important cultural moment there. So you're actually taking the not the coals, yeah, taking the coals back to Newcastle. That
You
very
know,
moment. Yeah,
as I say in that book, The Black Chord, that I did with photographer David Corio, just reissued by Hat and Beard. I call it always the infinite loop of cultural exchange. The infinite loop of, I think I got that from that TV show, Doctor. What was that TV show? Never mind. I'm getting
Doctor Who.
not. It was like Doctor Who. They had a blackboard, and it was very solemn. And then they would draw on it this loop, and they would say, "This is some childhood TV show, not Doctor Kildare, something like that.
Yeah,
This is infinity." Right, this is infinity. So that was a moment, part of the infinite loop of cultural exchange. Yeah.
yeah, which is what all great music is, and it's a synthesis of everything that's around you, isn't it? And that point of time, exactly what's going on, which brings us to the next part, is you actually then you started making music and
Yes.
you made
I
your own
used to
record,
sing along
which
with
is a
Bob.
great
I
it's a
used to
great
sing.
record. Yeah.
Which record? Which record was a great record?
The one that John Lydon produced in a sense. Yeah. Well, you
So
made a few things. You
I
did a
was
few things,
talking.
so talk through them. Yeah.
No, I just remember that I used to sing along with Bob Marley when we were just casually at home. Oh, it was nice. Um, yes. How did I get into making music? People ask me. I first did a lot with Adrian Sherwood. Me, Ari, and Nena did a lot of backup singing
Hmm.
for Adrian.
He's
But
just started at this point, and he must be like 18, 19, very
he was
young.
a little cherub in those days, John. He was a little cherub. He was very young and innocent. So yeah, so we were like his backing group. We were like the New Age Steppers. But
Hmm.
because everything was very casual, he never put my full name on it. So everybody assumed it was Vivien from the Slits. But it
Mm.
wasn't. It was me.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And then anyway, so that was that. And then I went on from there, Flying Lizards. That was fun. And we just got it together again at my debut
Well,
gig that I did in London at the Cafe Otto not long ago.
hmm,
First ever London show, because I'd never done a show in London before, because I never used to do shows.
yeah, it took your time.
My compilation
What was
came
your
out.
role? What was your role in the Flying Lizards?
I wrote the songs, I wrote and sang two of the songs that I may say from that album were the best reviewed songs, if I may say. No, I wrote and reviewed two jolly nice songs. Now, David Cunningham, the King Lizard, he never wants to revisit them because he's very, he's always in the future, he's a futurist. And he's like, that was just an experiment I did years ago. Let it remain in the past. But I'm like, excuse me. I wrote those songs. I think they're
Yeah.
jolly nice songs. And when I sing them, people enjoy them. So I carried on singing those songs, Her Story in the Window, and I still sing them to enormous acclaim. No, I still sing them and people enjoy them. And so I had this idea when I was doing my gig, my first ever London gig at the Cafe Otto, to ask my old cohorts, Steve Beresford and David Toop, if
Mhm.
they would join me. And I called us the Dancing Lizards.
Yeah. Yeah.
It went really, really well. It was amazing working with them because since then I'd done a lot of music since then. So much music with all sorts of people, even big people, Richie Sakamoto, Massive Attack, loads of big people. But it really was back to my improvisational roots. It was amazing. And when we did the show, I hadn't done any improvising, let alone ever on stage, because I used to improvise the Flying Lizards. It was in the studio. But John, I did it. It went really well.
Yeah. 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 Well, the
And
stage is the place for
it just
improv.
had the right
Yeah.
arc. It just landed where I wanted it to. I was well chuffed. Yeah,
So,
so
yes,
yeah.
go back to say Laundrette, which is a great track, and that was an EP one. It was I really like that kind of lo-fi post-punk dub,
Yeah.
minimalist dub vibe to it. Is that because basically nobody's a virtuoso, so it just
No, I
captures the
mean,
feel? Or was it deliberate to make something that was almost
oh
empty
no, I
but still
wanted to make
worked?
something sort of like that.
Hmm.
I wanted to make something sort of like that. It's got that samba feel from my sister and my early days with Astrid Gilberto. Yeah, no, I wanted something like that. But the good thing is that John Lydon did sort of pay for it to happen, bless him. And that happened because I'd made, as one did, a cassette. So I had like two cassette players, and you could do this thing of bouncing between the two cassette players, and it worked really well. I wish we could just still do that, to be honest. It was, anyway, sorry. Um, and I played it to John, but the big thing about that song for me is not only the gathering of all those people who were spontaneously improvising, and I unfortunately forgot my camera because that was a once in a lifetime moment with like Robert Wyatt there, George Oban, John Lydon, and Vicky from the Raincoats, Steve Beresford. It was really fantastic. But for me, that song is really all about George Oban, the late George Oban, the bass player of Aswad. He was my very good friend. He's no longer with us, and he was one of those people who lived in Lancaster Road that we were talking about. And I just remember being in his, Notting Hill Council Trust flat, and he just played me this bass line. And when I heard it, wow, I knew it was gold.
Mm.
And I just stood there with him and I just sang the whole song. It was, I think, maybe my moment of purest creativity in my existence to date.
Mm.
Because it was, when they talk about it just comes, the beauty of the bass line. And it was just there, the whole story. He was fantastic bass player. I think he's really underrated. So melodic, so original.
Mm.
Anyway, so that was Laundrette, and luckily it made John laugh. I played it to him in Gunter Grove, and he thought it was hilarious, but it is quite funny. And then we went and did the record. And John, he was a big Robert Wyatt fan. And Robert Wyatt was interested in John. So it's like everybody was sort of interested in each other. It was really a wonderful session. I didn't know how it would turn out, but I did want that lo-fi thing with a samba feel.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so
then
it's a really
yeah.
original sound on it. It doesn't really sound like anything else, which is a victory.
Actually,
Yeah.
guess what it sounds like if you ask me? As I go around nowadays, I keep hearing Afro beats, right? You hear
Mm.
Afro beats everywhere you go. It all sounds a bit like Laundrette to me. Have you
Kind of,
noticed? I'm just thinking of the sparseness and a touch of samba, that's all.
yeah,
Otherwise,
yeah, yeah.
Afrobeats at what at all. I have,
So, yeah.
have you?
So you've
I have
written,
a really funny Afrobeat song actually. Maybe you have, but as yet I have not heard a kind of funny, maybe hilarious Afrobeat song. And I have to say, Laundrette, it is amusing, isn't it?
yeah,
I
yeah.
find I have to sing it, again now. It still gives me a little chuckle.
So when you've written about the she punk, so what was it like being a she punk at the time?
What's it still like being a she punk? Yeah, you have to be ready for anything. You have to be sure of yourself. And if you don't feel that sure of yourself, you have to be able to bluff it. So that's it.
Was it a time where women got more space? I mean, that's the myth. I mean, what was the reality when you're
It
actually
was,
there?
I can tell you exactly. I was so well positioned that it was inevitable. I had to carry the story forward because I really saw it because I was on sound. I was brilliantly placed by destiny to observe the entire thing. So pre-punk, there was like kind of no girls. I was really lucky I had the great Caroline Coon in my life, the great, artist and cultural activist, and hugely resonant creative person, so she gave me a lot of strength, to be honest. She did. And what happened was there was no way in, really, prior to punk. I was interested in talking to women. And I did talk to some women. I talked to Stevie Nicks. That was great. Well, it's always great, talking to these lovely artists. So I took Stevie Nicks shopping in Portobello Road when there was still a lot of good gear. She loved it. And then I more than once got to interview Gladys Knight. An honor. I learned a lot from Gladys Knight and the Pips. Shall I share with you a gem from the Pips? When you're staying in a hotel and you're on the road, you're working, before you go out to the gig, order the dinner, right? And then when room service comes, hide it under the bed, because otherwise when you come back, room service will have thrown it out. So that is a little tip from my many years of experience in music. That's one thing that's really stuck with me, and it's been quite useful. So yeah, Stevie Nicks, Gladys. There's not very many. There was no women, and then suddenly punk came in. It was just great. I had this sort of posse, and I wasn't so completely alone, except for Caroline Coon,
Mm.
And what's really nice, and I say this in my is that most of us are still really good friends today. I mean, really good, like we keep in touch, we talk on the phone, not just something passing acquaintances from back in the day, but proper mates. I think we went through a lot of struggles together as a generation.
Mm.
And
Was
experience.
punk, so for you, punk was empowering, or did it just create a space of
I haven't got
possibilities?
out of the book here to show. Excuse me, I should show you. I'm wearing the dress, the
Oh,
Revenge of
yeah.
dress.
I like the concept. That the concept's important. So, I mean, do you think it had an effect on society as well? It wasn't just in the music scene. The inner circle. There's a knock-on effect that goes through everything.
I think it's definitely encouraging. And at points like this, I always have to say that when I was writing She Punks, I didn't know I could get so angry, right? Because I'm really a jolly, cheery person, much as you know me, right? But I was shaken, and acknowledging, all the barriers and all the obstacles that one had to find a way to circumvent, and the realization it wasn't just us as writers or musicians, it was sort of everyone, like in the visual arts. Think about it. Caroline Coon, for example, originally she was going to be a visual artist, and now she is a big visual artist, acclaimed and so on. But at the time, you really couldn't get arrested as a woman. And that's not that long ago. Of course, now in certain parts of the world, they're trying to do the whole, Kinder Kirche thing again, putting us back in our box. So, yeah, I think it's enormously important. And one felt, as I said in the book, that after that sort of she-punk explosion, as it was for us at that time in the UK, and there was sort of a hiatus in the 80s. It became very much boy bands, and it was much more Thatcher Reagan, much more materialistic, glossy, and our contribution was sort of became an embarrassment and was kicked to the side, right? And then I remember when the Riot Girls came along. I remember talking about this with Tessa and Jeanette and people. We all were looking at him saying, wow, they're like, our little sisters, do they even realize we were there? In fact, it turned out that they did, which, because of one woman, Toby Vale. She was like the archivist of the crew, and she made sure they knew about the Slits. And Kathleen Hanna of Riot Girl told me with awe about this Slits interview tape that they used to just play over and over again, where the interviewer, let me take a sip of water, where the interviewer was a bit of an idiot. And they ragged him mercilessly, and they like, it was apparently hilarious. And when the Riot girls heard it, women, they were like, they couldn't believe it, because normally everybody's so, decent and proper in American media, and you're kowtowing to the journalist. You're not, ripping him to shreds, to paraphrase Blondie. Yeah. So they were wild girls, the Slits, and through this one Toby Vale, they did hear about it, which is of course why shortly before he left us, Kurt Cobain was going to take the Raincoats on tour. That was their like brush with the, what might have been the big contact with the American market.
Well, he was really versed in all this as well, but he knew. I mean, I know Toby, and he knew Toby as well. Yeah,
it was through Toby and and Kathleen and all that, and they loved the Slits. But gosh, yes, I think I was extremely lucky in my timing of my birth, right? Because I got to see a little bit. I still remember, how you remember things from when you were like 3, very little. I remember how ghastly the 1950s were, right? Vile. Forget what they say. For a woman, you had to wear this corsets and high heels and all this stuff. I mean, it's good if you want to be a fetish person. I don't want to harsh your mellow, but really for getting around every day, it's no fun, And but then I remember the 60s with all the liberation and the fun, and yet the level of hypocrisy, of course, as regards females, very, very rampant. So then I benefited from being post-war, you did too, and having that education. We had that education, and then I came of age in the 70s. That was my first time going out as a grown-up, if you can call it that, to be a punk. That was my first excursion in the world of grown-ups. Yeah, I was a student before then, but I didn't really, I didn't really participate that much at school, but I did, because I'm backtracking now. I'm sorry, I'm so excited.
I know it follows a narrative. It's cool.
All this stuff keeps sort of coming up, because my first music experiences, you were asking me about them when I was at school, was from babysitting. Because I was babysitting for the family of the drummer who played a lot with Fairport Convention and worked a lot with Sandy Denny in the group Fotheringay. These are golden names in the history of English folk. So I was their babysitter, and they would give me free tickets. So I did get to see, and I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I still remember seeing Jimi Hendrix from a box at the Royal Albert Hall in the Pop Proms that I got for babysitting. I got the tickets for babysitting. Like I said, I had no clue. I had no context. It was just like that. Jimmy. I thought it was yeah.
I don't think anybody had a context for Jimi Hendrix. It just seemed to appear out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's true. But I didn't even know he was appearing out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I knew nothing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So in the 80s, you mainly worked in TV. So was that?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, what was that like? I mean, do you feel like the war had been won, or is it just a different battlefield?
I had done a lot in music journalism. I've been doing the music. I had this duo in Paris, Chantage, which is French for blackmail. Myself and my friend Eve Blouin, who recently featured in the award-winning documentary Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat, but we can talk about that another time. Yeah, gosh, Paris was fun then. We had just an amazing time having that duo of Chantage, and it was very eclectic. And that, if you ever hear it, it's on my compilation CD Resolutionary. but you really hear the energy of that mix of, as we were talking about, quote in quotes, world music. You know, it's the start of the CD era, and we were hearing all this music we'd never got to hear before.
Mm. Yeah, and
Yes,
in Paris, there's a lot of African music, and
yes,
from
and
all
she's
the
actually my
yeah.
co-singer, my friend, my partner in the duo is actually African.
Mm,
So, and we had an African music radio show called Chérie Noire on
mm,
Radio Nova. And that's how come we had Manu Dibango's guitar player playing for us, Jerry Malakani. It's
mm.
it's just, you know, I do love that chantage stuff. I played our version of a Wailers song, Same Thing Twice, to a reggae purist critic friend of ours the other day. He was like, how can you have this African guitar on it? It's ruining everything. You know, he's entitled to his opinion. But to me, that was the whole point. You know, it
Mm.
was mixing it all. And we had steel pan. We had a fantastic steel pan player. And what was great was me and Ev just sort of did it. You know, we were with on celluloid, we had a little budget, and we had a vision of the sound, you could say. We had a concept for the sound. And it was sort of like we were global people. We were, even just us as two of us, we were already global, you know, in our perspective and in the way we'd come up, you know. And we went to a Hungarian restaurant in Queensway in Bayswater. They had a fantastic gypsy trio. And we went up to them and we got the violin player to come and play for us. And it was his first ever time in the studio. He was fantastic and he loved it. And it's so passionate. Of course, my father was a violinist, so I'm a sucker for that. You know, so passionate. And then Jerry Malakani, the way everybody just got into it. And we went up to the front line, you know, All Saints Road, and the Mangrove, you know, where I was a neighbor, so I knew the Mangrove and all that scene, and Frank Critchlow. And I went over and I said, Frank, or whoever I spoke to, who do you think is like the top steel pan player? And well, this guy Bubbles, I'm a bit shocked to realize, not very journalistically, I don't think I ever got his real name. Bubbles, he was the leader and he plays so fantastically. So that was a fabulous moment and expresses that feeling in Paris at that time. And one could not imagine, you know, the way there would be this debate about cultural appropriation, because that time the meeting was all very, very new, you know, and we were so ecstatic to be able to play together and hear all this, and everybody was,
Surely
you know.
all music's cultural appropriation if you want to push that one out. I mean, a
Oh,
guitar is an Arabic instrument. I mean, where does this one end?
and you know, I think that, you know, when we have Morris dancers in England, you know where that
Mm.
comes from. They're
Yeah, Moorish.
Morris dance. They
Yeah,
are, because you can see
bagpipes.
the steps, how they're really like kind of not quite as strong Senegalese traditional dance steps. I mean, I
Mm.
recognized the steps when I was watching Midsummer Murders, which frequently does have Morris dancers.
Yeah. But it's, I mean, you know, all musicians just listen, soak up music and it comes out
Yeah,
in a different order. That's the
yeah.
point, isn't it?
When people talk to me a lot about, because I'm in New York a lot, you know, I live in New York and that's a lot of the debate over there. And I always think of Sly and Robbie. When the police, you know, Sly and Robbie, arguably the definitive reggae rhythm section, and played on all the hits, had their own incredible label, Taxi. And when the police started getting big, that time they were doing a gypsy thing. I mean, not gypsy thing, they were doing a reggae thing. And I said to Robbie, so what do you think? Everybody said, oh, they're ripping you off. And Robbie says, are you kidding? This is great. It's just going to get our vibe out and more people are going to come and find us. So
Mm.
to tell that story when people talk to me about cultural appropriation, there
Yeah.
has to, they talk about that a lot in America where I'm based, you see. They
Well,
do. They don't talk as much
um,
about
that's
it.
probably academics talk about it, musicians get on with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very, but some musicians do talk about it, trust me. Yeah, they do.
Mm. But
But maybe,
how do they know what their culture is that they're allowed to play?
yeah, agree.
If you live in New York, you know, and this is what thing about your music and on your writing's always been the backdrop. And I think this is what's great about cities. Cars go past playing one, you know, hip hop, next car's playing thrash punk, that's cars playing, I don't know, gypsy music, and that's what you hear. And it's all different music circulating around.
Exactly.
It's a fantastic place to be, isn't it? How can that
Exactly.
not soak in? Yeah.
That's why, people who think like us, sometimes I get a bit irritated. I try to be cool and compassionate, but we don't get it because for us, we understand it, what makes us and what makes our aesthetic, the sounds we were raised in this case, the sounds of the city, the multifarious sounds, especially New York, as you say, with the
Mm.
Latin and, gosh, I remember how in Paris in the early 80s, though, the African music, like the conscious reggae of the 70s, was at a height. You know,
Mm.
I loved so much that music and that guitar sound.
I
It's
mean,
glorious.
after Paris, could you only go to New York to get that kind of the whole world's living in that place all at once kind of city, or was it because you got a job there?
Well, that Paris thing was in the early 80s. Yeah, I got a job there in Paris. The editor, Jean-Francois Bizot, the late editor, very great media visionary, he invited me to Paris to work for Actuel, although they had to translate all my articles into French, which
Wow.
takes 3 times as much space. So I had to write everything a third of the length it would have normally been. But yeah, so I was invited there, and when there, just got involved with the music. I'd already done Laundrette. They got me there to do a music story, actually, where I went and auditioned with a lot of French bands. I wonder what happened to that story.
Mm.
Somewhere in a
But
file. So, yeah.
next book.
Yeah, next with another book.
And then from Paris to New York, was that just because,
No, I
again,
went
it's
from Paris back to London, and then what had happened was while I was in Paris, I wrote a big article on African music in Paris for the NME, and they did from the Tube a big segment on African music in Paris, which I
yeah, I
presented.
remember that. Yeah,
Actually, what the blonde girl who used to host the Tube.
Paulie Yates. Was it
It
her?
was no longer with us,
Yeah, Paulie Yates. Yeah.
but she came on that shoot, but she wouldn't leave her hotel room. So I wound up just hosting the whole thing.
Mm.
So, and then I got friendly with the Tube and I came back to London and set up my own television production company. You could do that sort of thing in those days with my partner, in work-wise, Mick Sawyer, who I'd met while he was working for the Tube. And we made an independent television production company and had pretty good run for a long time. We had our biggest show was a Big World Cafe. Do you remember
Hmm.
that?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we used to
That was
watch it.
totally our
Yeah.
brainchild.
Hmm.
I got Cold Cut to do the sound, the theme tune, and we had a lovely theme tune. That was fantastic because we did a lot of interesting things. Like we got Kassav in the studio, the big group from Guadeloupe. They're still one of the hugest groups in the world today. Even though a lot of Anglophones haven't heard of them, trust me, they're fantastic. And they went on.
Mm.
So their revolution kept on rolling to the present day where they sell out huge auditoriums. So we were able to showcase them and Nana Vasconcelos. And was that group, The Beautiful North, loads of pop groups as well. It was a real mix. So that was kind of a triumph. But we were a little independent production company and we weren't that savvy business-wise. So we had the concepts. And then I went to New York. But to be honest, that was for personal reasons.
Okay. Yeah.
Adorable personal reasons of the very best kind, right?
Hmm.
Why I went to New York. That was why I went to New York. And then when I got to New York, it wasn't the same as England, where I could go into the BBC and Channel 4 and have a great idea and, hopefully you'd make it. It was all different. It was all, oh, you have to go to the Ford Foundation and apply for a grant. And I just found myself writing. And then next thing you know, I found myself professoring and doing more songwriting for others than singing myself. I think I lost my voice somewhat at that point.
Mm.
And then
But
it came back when people asked for it, because in 2016 they made that compilation CD of mine, Resolutionary. So they asked me, and the voice returned. And then I was asked to do gigs, which you'd never done before, because like the Flying Lizards were much too cool and cerebral to go and cavort.
Get sweaty. Yeah.
Sweaty, exactly, sweaty, drunken strangers. No, absolutely not. So yeah, that was the first time. But you know what? What really helped me that I could transition to being an effective performing artist. You've never seen me perform, right? But I'm effective, trust me. Was the fact that I've been teaching.
Because that's a performance.
Yes. And okay, at NYU, pretty posh school, small classes, you know, his eyes almost, well, finished soon. But I'd also had the privilege of teaching at Rutgers University in New Jersey, where I had like class of 80 or 100 people. I was in an auditorium. So what was amazing was, you know, I tapped into this dominatrix side of myself. Never really known existed. I'm good. You over there in the back row, don't think you're getting away with this. You know, put down that tablet and listen to me. And you know, and so I developed that almost like a hunter's instinct. You know, you're watching them all. Now, of course, I haven't played in a really big arena. I've played in quite big places. But generally, I still have that same feeling. I'm scouting around. Oh, yeah, get them all, grab them all. You know, that I was able to do that because of by then I had a number of years of teaching under my belt.
When did you become the punk professor, which is such a great title?
Thank you. That's a title. That is what I am and what I was. So, because what are you? What are you doing? I'm teaching punk. Oh, I'm the punk professor. So, you know, that happened about 19. Okay, the department's been about 25 years and I've been there from the start. So where does that bring us to? 1990 something? Anyway, whenever the department started, I was there. They invited me to teach and they said, what did you want to teach? And I was sitting in a cafe on Houston Street looking around and they were just, I remember they knocked down this garage that had a big neon whale on the wall that was such a quirky, charming feature of the old Lower East Side. And it had become a completely undistinguished something Nike or store, some athletic store. And I looked around and I said, we have to teach them punk. People need punk.
Now, as a course changed over the years, you know, does punk react to the time? You know, like the punk you teach now, what punk is perceived as now, is it different from 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years ago?
You know, I probably couldn't still be doing it if all the courses didn't change all the time in response to what's going on. However, having said that, you know, I've been 10 years a documentary maker and many, many more years a journalist, you know, also whatever, before I was teaching. So I'm all about structure, like Revenge of the Sheep Hunts. This one took ages to come up with a structure. And I can honestly, I'm very proud of the structure of this book, which took me a long time to crack. So it takes a lot of thinking and divining for the flow. It's like a sequencing. So that was the approach I took. And I can tell you that all my courses do still, though I says it myself, I shouldn't. The courses, the structure still stands up. It's what you slot in them and the attitude and all that changes. But still the structure holds.
In the current times, do you think we need more of a revenge of the sheep punk, especially in the USA? You know, was there a feeling like 20 years ago, maybe people are listening and these ideas are getting across, and now they feel like, oh, Jesus, no one actually even listened to any of this stuff. Or is it even more important now?
Well, very important, especially, you know, like I've said, you know, I live in America. It's just, who can believe what's going on there, like hurtling back to the barbaric Middle Ages on several levels, and a whole aspect of being a woman, let alone, you know, people who are, say, gay or, you know, along those lines, as it were, you know, terrifying times, you know, really terrifying times. They're trying to put the genie of, you know, free spirit back in the bottle. And, right now, as we speak, it's really a tussle, isn't it, with the legal system and the government. And as we speak, we don't know what's going to happen. So, yeah, totally. She punks need to feel, when I say she punks, and the men who love them. Never think just she punks. I mean, I do, but you can't. We're together.
Mm.
Any of us just do it on our own. The enlightenment has to be, among all the genders.
Yeah, I
To
mean,
be,
I think
you know,
most people got that. Yeah.
yeah, I feel very strongly about that. I'm so not a separatist. And when I look at my own work, especially like the music work, guys always ask me to do music, so I always did a lot of music with guys and I love them. Yeah, I can't separate myself off. Look at Youth, my producer now. I have to say, Youth is a really extraordinary fellow. He's your friend, isn't he, as well? We
Yeah,
love
he's brilliant. Yeah.
Now, the thing about Youth, right? Have you noticed? Do you remember that LL Cool J? And it was like Ladies Love Cool J, right? So isn't it LL Youth?
So he says.
He works with all the women. He works with all the women flock to him. It's not just me. He worked with Polly, didn't he? Did Polly's last album. Yeah, he helped Celeste Bell with his daughter, Siobhan, right, from Bananarama. He seems to do, of course, I helped hook him up with my girl Gina of the Raincoats. I helped get together, and that's been very productive. Anyway, loads of others. All the girls work with him. Why is that? I guess he's not so sexist. And I think it's because, and here we're treading on sensitive, dangerous ground, cat louder than war, handle it. But he is into the goddess. So yes, he's into the goddess. I think that comes out with him because a lot of his music, I mean, let's face it, we love Killing Joke. Are they really deeply in touch with their feminine side? I'm
In
not
a
that convinced.
in a weird kind of way, I think they
And
are.
way,
Yeah.
probably, actually. You know what? You're right. But
Hmm.
their expression doesn't, comes on pretty testosterone, doesn't it?
Mm. But even in that maelstrom, when you watch them live, Youth isn't in the angst place, is he?
Youth
He's
is
kind of
different. And by
mm,
saying this, I don't mean I love Killing Joke. Don't get me wrong.
mm.
Trying to define how they are. They come on in quite a testosterone way, don't they?
There's a space for it. It's important.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
describing them like
Mm,
a journalist.
mm,
But Youth obviously is an engine of that and crucial for that, but also because he's got this other side. So
mm.
he's open and receptive. So
It brings a fluidity to their rigid testosterone. I think that's.
yeah, no, I don't want, I mean, obviously a jazz is, um into all sorts of edgy exploration, and I'm sure we'll have had a little chat at some point with his feminine side, no doubt.
I think so. Yeah, I think you can see that. Yeah.
So maybe I was speaking too crudely. Was I speaking too?
No, no, because that would be the impression you would get of them. But you can sort of feel there's a bit more going on there,
They
a
do
lot
have
more
that.
going on there. Yeah.
Yes, maybe I was unfair, but they're not sort of soft and shifting like the Raincoats. They come on in quite a manly
They
way.
do, but
Would you
there's
say Killing Joke are of kind of a virile, or were, or if are they
they,
still
I think
a
they're
virile?
both. I think there is that. Well, they're obviously not going now, but there is that side to them. But there is a soft shifting
Realize
as well,
why
isn't
we should be talking about me. The clock is going.
there? Because this is interesting. It
Yeah,
plays
no,
into the conversation.
we could
Yeah.
rattle on for hours, but I'm sure there's something more we should say about I before we hang up because we're going to
Yeah,
hang
yeah.
up.
Well, definitely. The other courses, and we touched about
Huh?
this at the beginning. The other courses you're doing, like the Bowie one, Fela
Yeah.
Kuti,
Oh,
yeah, so and
oh,
Bob
I've taught
Marley.
other courses, like I've
Yeah.
taught a records course. I taught a Clash course. That was quite fun teaching the Clash.
Hmm.
I mainly have seemed to have settled into these four for the minute.
Do you find them? Are they very different figures? Like say Bob Marley, Fela Kuti, David Bowie, or is there something? about each one of them is quite similar as well? Is there something about them that
I hadn't
joins
even
them
thought of
together?
that. I hadn't even thought about that. Isn't it
Mm.
great doing an interview with somebody else who sees
Yeah,
things from the
well,
outside?
from distance. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I thought, well, the two of them were the two of the artists I was absolutely closest to in my life. They were people who molded me and had an enormous impact and who I had a jolly good laugh with and some jolly good fun and, great times. And that was Bob Marley and Fela Kuti. So that was why I did them, because I felt, hey, that I knew those fellows. They
Mm.
trusted me. If I'm teaching, I should carry on trying to help put out, what they showed me, but I still think is very important. Then punk
Really
was
important.
a positive influence, so I feel good about teaching punk. As I said, the only one that is not like just my life, wasn't drawn to teaching from my own personal experience was David Bowie, where I come into it just as a fan and a Londoner,
Mm.
that
Yeah,
generation.
because you
And
can add with Bowie, you can join everything goes through him, doesn't it? From the
so
everything. Yeah, because he's a
yeah,
cultural magpie.
I'm one of those Jewish Buddhists, and so it's nice because it's the only course I really get to talk a little bit about Buddhism is the David
Yeah,
Bowie course because he
yeah.
was very formal,
He did dabble, did he? Yeah.
I don't know whether you can say dabbled. He was a Buddhist. He was a Buddhist in his youth. He
Mhm.
then became. He was going to become a monk, but the head monk or whatever they call it said, I think your work lies out in the world. So he took it out in the
Mm.
world. Even when he was sort of, say, completely lost it in his LA period out there on coke and so on. He was on his journey from which he was to emerge. But you're still a Buddhist. And as you probably know, or maybe you don't know, he had a Buddhist interment burial.
Mm.
Yeah. So he
Mhm.
was he never stopped being a Buddhist.
Okay, yeah. I thought he's intellectually interested in the ideas, which of course is understandable. I thought
Oh,
because he went, he just his person, he wore a lot of jackets and genuinely wore them. It wasn't a flippant thing. Just interested in everything, which I think makes a great artist. Actually,
oh yeah, definitely. But isn't it like, what I always say, once a punk, always a punk?
yeah.
In a way, inside. So, even if you're not practicing, I think to me, maybe I'm being naive, but it's how I see things. He still had that, he understood what it meant to be a Buddhist. It was still inside him, even if he was completely out of it in some way in another sphere and domain. And it was always a touchstone for him to which he
Hmm.
clearly returned. And then he did quite a lot of songs like Little Boy Blue, quite a lot of actually the music was. Anyway, I don't know how we got into that. That's merely one aspect of the Bowie course. It's just that when we start talking, we just talk.
Now, these courses sound really interesting. The other thing I think with the Fela Kuti and Bob Marley, I mean, revolutionary figures because they, in a sense, they broke the Anglo-American pop axis, didn't they? These are artists from the outside what the music industry was for decades who became international superstars, aren't they? So that to me, there's a parallel there. I mean, musically they're different, aren't they? But what they represent in a sense is similar.
They ever in their lifetimes, well, Bob became very big in his lifetime. Fella is a towering, iconic figure, but in his lifetime, was he as well known in the wider popular music domain? Maybe not.
Mm.
I
Mm.
think he's one of the ones who's Bob is the sort of the same as well. Obviously, his legend has only grown, but it's very much so with Fella. I mean, why is the dominant sound we hear everywhere called Afro beats?
Mm.
Musically, it's not like Fella. Message-wise, it's not like Fella. It's just a way, I'm sure, of paying a homage to that man who
Mm.
helped create a very organic synthesis that became
Yeah.
Afrobeat and because what he did was he did have the rhythms of the village. Fella would research stuff from the villages,
Mhm.
stuff that he didn't know as a city boy. He would go out and he would mug up, and also for the dancers, for the steps and so on. And then, of course, he was very influenced by James Brown when he rehearsed every day. he rehearsed to, Miles Davis. He himself rehearsed to American jazz all the time. So, and he synthesized all that. Oh, it's lovely. I do enjoy these teachings, actually.
But he transcended it, didn't he? Because he made it Nigerian. This is the key part of him, wasn't it? And now the key, to me, one of the key cultural drive forces in the UK is Nigerian diaspora, with grime, loads of music and art all the way through. It's like 30 years ago,
Right. Well,
it was
right.
invisible, but now it's a thing, isn't it? Mm.
Yeah, they carry the swing, but it's funny, things go in cycles, don't they? Before we were really knocking around that much, Trinidad was very huge. It was everything was calypso and I remember as a kid things like Lance Percival, gossip, calypso. I guess that was like the first world music stuff I heard was British sort of calypso, and of course that was fantastic. We love calypso. Actually, the last I'm including you in this because no doubt you do love calypso. Who wouldn't?
Oh yeah, yes, right. Yeah.
I'm pretty proud that the last article, the concluding article in my book, is with the Mighty Sparrow. And in fact, I was so high. I always knew I wanted to end on this article, which I did for The Guardian, and he was there performing for the Windrush moment. And can I just read to you? Because he came in my flat in Jackson Heights. My dear friend, Trinidadian journalist Isaac Ferguson was there too, who'd also known him for years. He plunked himself down. He says, "Where's the TV? Put the TV on." He was wanted to see the news. And as he was watching the news really intently. As I watched him watch the news, I just kept thinking that since the 50s, this guy had been watching the news and processing it in this great satirical and informative music of calypso. We had a good reasoning, and I say to him at the end, hang on, I asked him what would he like to see discussing the Windrush, how would he like to see things, what would I like to see? People get together and get involved with fixing things instead of just having everything severed. We have to just hope that the younger ones step in and get involved as early as they can to make things better. Singularity is not a thing that we want too much. We don't want to be singular as time goes on. We want to be together.
Those words mean more now, even more now than they did then, don't they?
I was getting a bit creepy thinking about it, honestly, because he's older than us, he's venerable. And that is how he still sees life. And I think it's the simple truth. I was so glad to end on that note.
Which is a good place to end on this note. So thanks for your time, Vivien. That was great.
Thanks, John.